name is Tom Palaima. I'm a professor of classics at University of Texas, and I have had a lifelong interest really in the whole topic of violence. I don't know why, but I have. And when I was an undergraduate, I was fortunate enough to take a Greek history course, and I was recommended to take a look at an old Greek history text that had a bunch of Greek in the footnotes. And so I started learning Greek, and soon thereafter I read Homer's Iliad. And so from that point on, I knew that what I wanted to do with my life was to study the Iliad and the whole culture surrounding it. Well, the Iliad is sometimes called the Bible of the ancient Greeks, and it has that kind of central impact on Greek culture. The reason for it is that at the time of civilization that the Greeks flourished, it was mainly an oral culture until the 4th century BC. And the way one communicated the central realities of life, what it meant to be human, what it meant to grapple with the hardships that life presents to everybody, were encapsulated in these great oral songs, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the poems of Hesiod, and so on. And so the Iliad it still has a fascination for us, and we're drawn to it because it speaks so directly and honestly about things that are important for human beings. That's the simplest explanation I can offer. That's a question to be asked of anthropologists, theologians, and philosophers. I just know that men are attracted to war. And part of it, again, is that war puts one on the outside the realm of the controls that are placed upon us to operate within civilized society. Sigmund Freud, right after the outbreak of World War I, wrote an essay called Disillusionment in the Time of War and Death that addressed this issue. In normal society, for us to operate, we can't show aggression to one another. We have to respect one another. We have to curtail our impulses, our appetites, our desires. In war, a lot of those things are taken away. Even the worst taboo, which is killing another human being, we are all of a sudden authorized to do that. And so the almost animalistic rush and enjoyment of doing things that are even horrific because of the value system that you have are still there. And so one essay that I would recommend everybody to take a look at besides Freud's, and it may sound strange, but in the 1984 Esquire magazine, Bill Broyles, who was a Vietnam veteran and is now a rather famous Hollywood screenwriter, wrote an essay, Why Men Love War. And he talked about, in that essay, the sort of beauty of war, with these great, powerful explosions with tracer bullets at night, and the exhilaration of having your life at risk. There's no point at which you feel more exhilaration, and almost even a kind of sexual reaction, a life force reaction, than when your own life is put at danger and risk. So the elements, and this is one of the great problems with even post-traumatic stress disorder nowadays. Men come back from war horrified at what they did, but they're also simultaneously charged up, physiologically charged up. And the Iliad at one point has Achilles saying that the anger of war, the anger of battle, goes down the throat almost like an opiate and feeds the body and is like a pleasurable experience. Oh, there are a lot of positive things that come out of war. One thing is a recognition that war shouldn't, after World War I, which in the 20th century was the greatest carnage, 20 million casualties, just horrific battles. I'll talk a bit about them tonight. Afterwards, people called it the war that will end all war. So at least there's a resolve or a recognition that war is a terrible thing. But within war, people are capable of displaying a courage love for one another, even a kind of sense of a shared humanity that crosses over the boundaries between one enemy and the other. In all the war literature that I've surveyed, it's almost universal that somewhere embedded in a war story will be the moment when somebody who's fighting an enemy looks at him and says, "You're just like my brother. You are another human being too. What you're going through, I go through." And so the people who are fighting wars often recognize the common nature of mankind in a way that we don't recognize in daily life. And so this is the reason that the general public, which unfortunately doesn't have to fight wars, gives out medals and has public ceremonies recognizing the tremendous courage that people will exhibit, and all these other aspects too. So on the more mundane side, as you know, technology generally advances through war, because all civilizations have to protect themselves, and they put a maximum amount of energy into making sure, if they're wise, just as we have, that we have the best war toys imaginable to protect ourselves. So technological advances, recognition of common humanity, and acts of courage and transcendent brotherly love, ironically, in the most brutal periods of brotherly hate. It's a clear fact that now there's a great divorcing of the general population from the harsh realities of war. We can send a very small part of our population off to fight our wars. We can use drones, we can use an amazing amount of technical equipment to fight our battles. Whereas if you were back in classical Athens, you knew that every citizen, father, brother, son, uncle, cousin, nephew, was off there fighting. And you therefore really had to justify the war you were undertaking to this population and their surrounding families. So one of the biggest changes is that, the divorcing of the civilian population from the realities of war. I'll make some of that point tonight. The Iliad is so filled with gruesome scenes of battle that it even caused Friedrich Nietzsche, as you know, wasn't any tame soul, to wonder at this. And he said, "I don't think that we can really grasp the essence of the Iliad in Greek, what it meant to the Greeks, because we're essentially different, we're remote from it. But it's so explicit, and as you know, during the Iraq and Afghanistan presidentially authorized uses of force, which we call wars, we couldn't even have on television flag-draped coffins. So there's a great gap that's developed, and it makes it easier for people to send troops off to war if the general civilian population doesn't really grasp what's involved. The ancient Greeks did not have Geneva Conventions, but they did have pretty hard and set rules of practice. Homeric warfare to us sounds barbaric and cruel. If you take an enemy city, you have the right, and it's standard practice, to kill all the men and sell the women and children off into slavery. We would not do such a thing these days. So one could say that there's been a development since ancient times to modern times. At the same time, with modern mechanized warfare have come the targeting of pure civilian populations. You know, Kurt Vonnegut's famous novel, Slaughterhouse-Five, he was a prisoner of war in a slaughterhouse, fortunately a slaughterhouse sort of freezer, when Dresden was firebombed. Dresden, which had no military value, but just needed to be destroyed as a kind of payback to the Germans for what they had done to London. So the targeting of civilian populations is pretty horrible. The ancient Greeks, too, always had to have a justification to go to war. We now have this, what I think is morally corrupt practice called preemptive warfare, which means if you just suspect that somebody is going to attack you, you can attack them first. We never think about this being applied to ourselves. As Martin Luther King said, the United States is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, and we are. Our military arsenal, our munitions sales, and so forth. And yet we never think that this could cause fear in a country. And if they followed the same practice, Iran, for instance, if Iran feels threatened by us, do they have the right to attack us? We feel that if we're threatened by Iran, we can attack them, but doesn't it work both ways? So. Well, the presentation today will be in two parts. One, trying to make us understand what the Iliad meant to the ancient Greeks from the earliest time. And it may surprise people to know we can isolate lines in the Iliad that come from the 15th century BC. So we know that a song tradition about war, the truths of war, had started by then, 15th century BC. The poems get written down, generally agreed upon, sometime in the late 8th or 7th centuries BC. You have had a long continuous tradition of 800 years of people talking honestly about war. And so you've been distilling it and distilling it and distilling it. And so I think most people would be surprised to see how long that tradition was and what power it has. The second part of the talk is going to be talking about why the Iliad, therefore, still speaks to us. And my feeling is it went through such a process of refinement and isolation of the true realities that it speaks honestly to us in a way we don't get honest talk. American culture is all about let's entertain ourselves, let's not worry about things. If you're stuck in traffic, you should honk the horn and give a guy the finger. This is craziness. What's really important in life. So we're sort of very pampered and removed from the realities of it. And so if you then sit down and encounter something like the Iliad that speaks such truth, that's a very powerful. You'll have a very powerful longing for it.